Welcome to an episode of the Chaplin Performance Podcast. I'll likely be posting this both as a video on YouTube and as an audio in various places. And in today's episode, I'm going to be riffing a little bit here on the number one belief that's holding you back when it comes to addressing asymmetries. We're going to go through what exactly the unhelpful belief is here, as well as the unhelpful actions that are downstream from this belief. We're going to talk about redefining asymmetry a little bit to help you update your understanding of what a better belief system might be. And then we'll talk about all the helpful actions that come from that and the beneficial results. So we're going to jump right in a second to what that is exactly. But first, who is this conversation really for? So this conversation in some ways is for anyone that's a human being because we're all asymmetrical. But to really dial it in, this is going to be most relevant to anyone that has to participate in a posturally demanding task that has a significant asymmetrical bias. So what do I mean by this? I've been playing music since I was 7 years old. I played the guitar and upright bass as well. We're talking thousands of hours of turning in one direction, holding one arm in a particular position and the other arm in another, using your eyes in a specific way, using your neck in a specific way, using your ears in a specific way, standing in a specific position. And those repetitions over time create patterns. Now, you can also see these type of patterns start to emerge in people that do other posturally demanding activities. So other musicians, for sure. You're also going to see this in surgeons if you have to do surgery in a very specific position. Carpenters, you hold a certain tool in one hand and maybe you stabilize with the other hand. Maybe you're always coming at what you're working on from a specific angle. You're reinforcing that pattern over and over and over again. And there's really countless examples of this, but those are the big ones I see. So anyone that works with their hands doing something asymmetrically is really going to be who this is targeted towards. And this includes people like rotational athletes. They often benefit from looking through the lens of asymmetry. Now, if you're one of these individuals, you may have already started to look at asymmetry as a potential target to focus on in order to get some level of improvement. And this is usually in the context of some sort of an injury or a condition that develops over time where there's some unpleasant, unwanted symptoms, right? So tension, pain, lack of balance, even things like blurry vision. There are a lot of things that can happen that are associated with asymmetries. And we're not saying that asymmetries cause them, but looking at asymmetry can help us figure out exactly what we might want to do. And even just working on those asymmetries directly within the context of training and our daily activities can help us to feel better. So there's a lot of value there. And if you come to that conclusion on your own, you're probably on the right track. Now, the problematic belief that often comes when you get to this point of awareness is if I fix asymmetries, then I'll be able to get back in the gym and train. But until then, I'm going to hold myself back from that. And you can really fill in that, get in the gym and train with any activity. So if we're talking about music, it could be, well, I'm not going to play music until I fix these asymmetries. Now, unfortunately, what we're doing in this case is we're giving that asymmetry all the power, and we are making it the number one important factor to influence when in many cases that asymmetry is not the cause of tension and pain, but rather a symptom. And you can see this for yourself just by looking around in the world and noticing the fact that most people have very asymmetrical posture. If you go into the gym, you'll see some of the strongest people with one shoulder that's lower than the other and a head that's always cocked over to one side. And most of these people are not dealing with any level of pain or dysfunction. Now, with that being said, when asymmetry goes awry and we're doing certain movements and positions too much, that can disrupt our fluidity of motion, our balance, and a lot of the things that we already talked about. So we have this kind of double-edged sword here where, yes, many people with asymmetry don't have any issues at all, but a lot of times an increase in asymmetry, and an increase in asymmetry generalized across all contexts, especially if it's a new increase in that expression of asymmetry, can certainly be associated with injury or some type of condition. And many times what this is signaling to us is that we have a lack of variability in our movement, and specifically a drop-off of certain movement skills and an emphasis on other movement skills. So the new belief that I want you to take is not that asymmetries are the problem, but asymmetries are actually the symptom. And even one level from that is that the symptom here is actually a lack of movement skills or a drop-off in the expression of specific movement skills. So before we dive into some of the helpful actions and how we're going to actually work with this new belief, let's talk about what happens when we have this old belief of we must fix asymmetries and then we can engage in these activities. So first and foremost, when we start to create that belief, we start to fear the activities that we perceive as being responsible for the asymmetries. And this is a real problem because that's going to cause us to go into those activities with a certain level of stress. And when we're in that scenario with a certain level of increased stress and our nervous system is all dysregulated, our nervous system is going to just say, what can we default to in terms of a movement strategy here that is going to get us through this? And what it will do is it will lean on those strategies which are already expressed to the most reliable extent. And unfortunately for the person who is already expressing certain movement skills to a greater extent than others, we're just going to lean on the ones we're already expressing, and we're going to lean away from those that we aren't expressing. And oftentimes this is actually just going to increase asymmetry as we have that increased stress response, and the asymmetry and the expression of those really reliable movement skills tends to be how we solve that movement problem. So what we need to do instead is be able to reduce that fear and threat and anticipation around those activities and do our best to modify to what extent we need to engage in them and do enough things outside of that context to be able to have other skills available to kind of balance that out. So the next thing that happens in terms of an unhelpful action is that we avoid the training that's going to help us to get those other movement skills that are going to increase variability. And we think that instead of engaging in real hard training, which is going to be able to stimulate those movement skills to a greater extent, we tend to limit ourselves to lower level activities where we're really isolating out these movement skills, but then we never actually get to the point where we're integrating them. And this is a real problem because if we're not integrating these skills into things that match the task demands of those tasks that we're engaging in, then chances are we're going to default right back to what's most reliable when we get into those situations. So, for example, if I'm standing upright with an upright base, I need to produce a lot of force into the string through my right hand, and I need to hold my left arm up in space for a prolonged period of time. And if I'm doing that for hours and hours and hours, that's a lot of stimulus. If I think that just getting down on the ground and reversing that relationship into the opposing movement and doing some sort of gentle breathing task is going to be enough to offset that, well, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? Now, that activity that I just described of getting on the ground and having one arm up in the opposite direction from the position that I was sustaining, that is actually a good initial framework to be able to recapture some movement skills, but the stimulus itself is not great enough for me to be able to offset the stimulus that was created with the activity itself, right? So not only do we need the actual movements themselves to offset what we're doing a whole lot and what we are not that good at doing a whole lot, we also need the level of stimulus to offset as well. So we need to be able to, within the context of training, be able to access these positions and skills, but also be able to load them to an extent where the stimulus that we get from that is equivalent to that we are getting in the actual task that is promoting that asymmetry in the first place. Now, on the more mental side of this, what often happens when we start trying just to do the low-level activities, and we're relying on those because we don't understand this stimulus issue, is that when those initially give us this feeling of, ooh, I feel a little bit better, something feels a little bit different, I feel a little bit looser, we then start to identify that activity as being beneficial because it made us feel better. We get very short-term minded, especially if we've been having symptoms for a long time, and we say, this is the key. I need to do this all the time. Instead, we need to look at that as a clue. Yes, the position we got into, that was probably beneficial. Great. If we are able to practice this and progress it, we're probably going to feel better. True. But this change in state that we experience from the day-to-day tension to this reduction in tension is nothing more than a clue. It is not the be-all, end-all. And what's likely to happen in this case, when we do something new for the first time, is that we do get that reduction in tension. And then as we practice it in subsequent times, we're not going to get the same result. And as we fail to get the same result from that, and we notice that these changes don't stick because we haven't matched the stimulus effectively, then we're going to start to get discouraged. And when we get discouraged through this process, we start having thoughts come up of, this is just another example of nothing works for me. Nothing ever works. Nobody can ever figure it out. I can't figure it out. This is never going to get better. I can't make any progress, right? And then these kind of feed into that threat and fear and avoidance. And overall, we become in this cloud of negative emotion where we're paralyzed and we really can't take any action. So we need to be able to move past this, right? So we already mentioned some keys here, and I'm going to give you some concrete ones here. So just to reiterate, the unhelpful belief is that you need to fix these asymmetries first, and then you can participate in whatever activity you want to participate in. And for most people, this is going to be, and then I can get into more intense training. Our updated belief is that asymmetries themselves aren't the problem, but rather a symptom of decreased skills. We're emphasizing certain skills over others, certain movements over others. We need to restore access to those that we don't have access to, and we need to match the stimulus that we are actually getting with respect to those strategies to the stimulus that we're getting with respect to the overuse strategies. So the updated belief is that a lack of skills causes asymmetry and a lack of stimulus causes asymmetry. From here, we can take some helpful actions. So most of us, when we're in this situation, we start to think that if I could just feel a little bit better, then I could do this. It's another if-then statement. So we select these exercises that don't match the stimulus, or we select exercises that are very much sort of the low-hanging fruit. We are afraid to select exercises that we might otherwise select if we were already feeling good. And by doing this, we're kind of keeping our brain in this I'm broken, I'm fragile problem mindset. And the problem here is that most of these exercises that we're selecting are going to be very much sensation-based, and they're going to get us into this trap of caring about how we feel more than looking at objective progress. So what we want to do here is we want to actually kind of zoom out and think big picture. What training would I be doing if I was already feeling good? This kind of gets us in a solution-based mindset, and it allows us to have an aspiration towards how we want to feel. Now, when we do this, we can start to select exercises that align with that new identity. And when we do this, we can then say, instead of I'm doing special exercises to account for asymmetry, we can say, I'm selecting exercises that align with my goals. How can I modify these exercises or set them up or give myself better cues to be able to account for these asymmetries and be able to restore the skills that I need to be able to work with this asymmetry? So we select those exercises, We design that initial program. We understand the positions and the cues and the modifications for each that we can use. And then we design our initial week of training. And we go and separate the process here into 3 essential phases. We just talked about planning, which is selecting, creating a hypothesis, right? What do I want to do? How do I need to adapt this for my situation? Then we go to the execution phase, phase 2. That's where we're actually doing the program. And here, this is not the time to try to update the plan or to judge what we're doing. This is the time just to get in there, do it, take it like it's a pill. Just do it. Don't worry about the effect. Be non-judgmental. Give it your best to go. And then after, in phase 3, that's when you can do all your post hoc analysis. And here, by this phase, you should have all your outputs, which are your objective data, reps, sets, reps and sets, weights used, right? Rounds completed, the pace at which you did something. You should also have the subjective data as well. How hard did things feel? How did this feel on my body? What was I experiencing during it? All that data should already be there and be recorded so that in phase 3 here, when you're going to the analysis phase, the kind of post hoc part of this, you can look at the feedback that you've gathered through the execution phase, and then you can start to either rework your hypothesis a little bit or be able to identify certain trends. So what's working, what's not working. And what I would say is here is if you can notice some positive trends, definitely lean into that. If you notice some negative trends, don't immediately change the plan. Instead, look at the entire week of training and start to ask yourself if there's a good reason that you can think of for why something might have been a little less tolerated than something else. For example, did you get a bad night's sleep? Did you eat enough? Did you already work that particular motion or muscle group earlier in the week? Is it something that you've worked that you haven't worked in a long time? Do you think the execution was off? Can you go back and look at a workout video and say, yeah, well, I was doing it kind of like that. Maybe if I do it this way, then it'll be better next week. I would go and look at all that. How much did I do? Did I do too much too fast? Is it new? What was my execution? What was my preparedness? What was my recovery? Answer all those questions and then don't immediately change what you're doing. Go back with an idea of how you might modify it a little bit, the same activity modified for the next week, and do it again. 9 times out of 10 with repeat exposures, what's going to happen is that you're going to be able to tolerate it better, or you're going to get more clarity around what it is that you're doing and the effect that it's having. So you might start to identify trends. Oh, all these other exercises started feeling good, but my squat isn't coming along. I ought to review that. What's going on there? I'm hiking that hip every single time. Okay, we're hiking a hip. Well, what is hiking a hip? It's pushing away from that side, using your hip to kind of pull up and your back to arch. Okay, what's a different way that I could push through that side? Maybe I need to increase the contribution of my hips. So what should I do next time? Maybe I need to stay heavier on that foot and that heel as I push into the ground while I'm doing my squat. Let me think of that as a cue. I'm going to go into my session with that intention. I'm going to try that. I'm going to take another video. I'm going to then go into that post hoc analysis afterwards. Look at the data that I've collected. Were the outputs better? Was the subjective response better? How did the video look? How did it feel? If all those things improve, now you've got yourself a winning cue. You can carry that cue through for the rest of your program. Just an example. Now, if you can do this, if you can go through this 3-step process of first designing the program, then executing it, and then gathering feedback, analyzing and modifying, what you're going to do is you're going to start this iterative process, this week-to-week loop where you are acting as your own coach. And what's going to start to happen is you're going to gather trends about what the things that are, let's say, more stubborn are, sort of what doesn't clear up on its own as a result of just going through a well-rounded program. But you're also going to start to develop underlying qualities. So you're going to be getting a little bit stronger. You'll be feeling a bit more resilient. Maybe your endurance will go up, right? Maybe your cardiovascular fitness will go up. Your energy levels will start to increase as a result of this, right? Your strength, your overall level of function. Maybe your sleep gets better. Maybe your digestion gets better. And as this happens, a lot of the asymmetries might start to fade. And as this happens, and a lot of these asymmetries start to fade, what you'll start to get a feel for is what was signal and what was noise. Because a lot of times when we are avoiding training or avoiding participating in activities or afraid of participating in activities, we get this noisy nervous system. And when we get this noisy nervous system, when we get the noisy nervous system, what ends up happening is then we have all sorts of things that start to hurt. We have all sorts of things that start to behave a little bit weird. And as we start to go through this process of training, naturally, so many of these things get better. And we get more confident and we get a little bit more detached from the outcome of needing to feel better as it relates to the specific asymmetry because we're just tolerating life on a better level. We're more prepared. We're overall having a better experience. And those little things that used to seem like big things are now able to be looked at in a little bit more of a detached, objective lens. When we can look at those, then we can really hone in and start to apply some more simple decision-making processes. Now, in this particular video, I'm not going to go through those. That is something that I cover in a step-by-step framework inside of my program, Total Body Restoration. And what this entails is looking at how your body moves within each segment of your first axial skeleton and then out into your extremities, and being able to understand within certain planes of movement and certain motions what you have access to and what you don't have access to. And then once you've gone through this training process and certain things have started to just get better through training, you're going to see what's left. And once you can see what's left, that's when you can circle back around and start to have a little bit more of an isolated type lens and say, what type of restorative or mobility type exercise might I use to supplement this link that isn't coming along quite as quickly? And that might be doing something that opens up some motion. It might be going back and doing some isolated strengthening for that. Or it might be just selecting different cues and constraints in your exercise program. But either way, by moving away from I need to fix first, then I can do, and instead going to let me do and train first, and then get feedback, and then go back and see if there's something that really needs to be, air quotes, fixed, you're going to find that everything becomes so much clearer. The whole process seems like it's much less consequential. Your whole life doesn't depend on it. And your overall experience as a result of this is something where you can actually see results as opposed to just kind of staying in one place. So I think that's a reasonable place to end here. Last kind of thing, just as a recap, if you are in that cycle of I need to fix and then I'll be able to train, or I need to fix and then I'll be able to get back to this activity, we need to invert that. We need to understand that a lack of skills are causing these asymmetries. The asymmetries aren't causing a lack of skills. So let's get a plan, start to acquire those skills, see which ones are stubborn, and then if we need to focus in with more of a laser focus at that point, that's when we start to apply some of these more isolated biomechanical frameworks, which is something that if you want to dive into, you can learn with me inside of my program, and I will leave a link somewhere, or you can go to my Instagram, to my YouTube, to my website, and you can sign up for the waitlist there. So thanks a lot for watching or listening to this, and until next time, peace.